What's up, guys? Josiah here with EasyCaters.com, and just doing a quick review today. Had some interesting moves in the market today, and so I wanted to review what's going on in the markets, and also look at the day's signals, volume signals, and also those signals for the week. I also wanted to mention that it looks like um, that Bitcoin signal that I mentioned several days ago has been working beautifully. So I wanted to kind of just point that out. We had a signal on this day right here, and we broke above that the next day, and it has not looked back since. We kind of took a pause here at 4 times your risk, and then went on straight up to 8 times your risk. So that was a beautiful trade. And so I just wanted to mention that one. That one worked really well. This stuff really does work. So I don't just talk about it. And it does work in Bitcoin, but it works in, futures, works on stocks. It's just a truth about markets. And so at least that's the way I see it. And so that's the reason I use it. So on the markets today, the E-mini S&P and the NASDAQ futures, they both put in a couple of potential volume signals over the last 2 days. And then today we triggered above one of those signals. That's not, it wasn't one of my favorite types of setups. If you see, I do like the daily location here, where we've pulled back. We're in an uptrend. We've pulled back. We've come down to this prior area here. And so that looks good. The one thing I don't like about it is just that this signal that we had yesterday was just not that strong of a signal. And if you look at it on the NASDAQ, it's especially not quite as good. You can see it there. You can see a signal here on the regular trading hours daily chart, but if you turn extended hours on, it kind of disappears. Also, the NASDAQ triggered above it, but then closed below it, so that's not as strong. The E-mini did close above it, so that did look a little bit better on the E-mini S&P. So take that as it is. There is a signal there of some support, and we had a really strong day today after kind of falling off a cliff and dropping below the low of yesterday. So we did, fully retrace that and then come back up and trigger and put in this outside bar. So anyway, not my favorite setup, but it is a pullback and it's potentially bottoming out here. So keep an eye on that. And along with that, a lot of stocks were doing similar moves today. So you can see here, PWR had these several volume signals in the past several days. We're doing this weekly pullback. We don't have a weekly signal yet on that. It did pick up a little bit this week. But anyway, so a trigger above these can start looking good for a pullback continuation trade. And if I can get my computer to catch up to me here with this video, slowing it down. Etsy, let's see what Etsy has here. Not that great. It's at a VWAP, but yesterday's candle was a wide range candle, so that's not that ideal of a setup. Kind of an ugly chart. CHD, I'm just going to look at the strongest of these signals. We had a volume signal yesterday on a nice little pullback here. And so that one looks pretty good, and it triggered today. So that's one that did trigger and looks pretty good. Pump. It had a nice little pullback here. You can see we've had a couple of these where, so we had a signal here that didn't trigger. We based for a little bit and then it never triggered, and then we just kind of fell from there. Then we had this signal that came in. We had a lower bar the next bar, and it eventually then triggered and failed. And so now we have this signal. This is farther down. Let's see if we have any kind of good level to base this off of. You can kind of see there was some support, like on the weekly chart. You can see we came down and touched the top of this pivot here. There is a volume signal in here on the daily. You can see it here too. And so there's a potential reason to go long there, and it did trigger today, so that looks pretty good. ACAM, this one looks decent on the daily. I don't really like this bar. That's kind of ugly, but that looks like a signal, and it did trigger and close above it today, it looks like. Not the best, honestly, but that is one. On the greens, let's see, NSC. Not much there. There is a volume signal. If we get a strong close above it, that would be good, especially above those last 2 days. SPGI. This one's decent. We're pulling back to this level here, you can see, and we've tested below it, flushed out, and we're trying to get back through this volume level now. So this could be good. JCI, that's more of a base breakout type of trade. I don't really like that, but it could work. This volume could signal the kind of trend continuation. If you look at this on the weekly, it could be a 1, 2, 3 continuation next week. It looks like we broke above and we're trying to come back down. We came back down and tested this level around 39.25 and then took back off. It's decent. We're resting on top of this 39.25 area, and I don't really trade this type of setup, but it could go. I really like that prior setup that it just finished on the weekly chart down here. I like this one a lot more, which is this pullback off the highs, puts in a really high volume churn against another volume churn level on these higher time frame charts. You can see it's about, this setup was on this base or on these pivot highs, testing those as support, and then it took off. So I like that a lot better than just a normal base breakout, but that one may work. And let's see, we got ITW. So this one triggered today above both of these levels. So that one looks good. It's a pullback on the daily. It's extended on the monthly a bit, but we're in this 1, 2, 3 continuation. So this one could continue on up toward the high of this pivot. AXTA. Nice little volume signals happening here at VWAP. But this needs kind of a trigger above here to get this all cleaned up and confirmed long. PayX. This one triggered today, and it's looking good. It's not that deep of a pullback or anything, so it wasn't really something that I would look for, and it's already kind of extended on the monthly and weekly. BAH. This one had, I like this red that happened 2 days ago, and then we triggered it on high volume churn yesterday as the market was selling off, and so that's interesting that it had relative strength yesterday, and then today it definitely had relative strength again, and so we triggered above that. So that's a nice little trade. Let me set this on today's signals and see what today came up with. Today was mostly a trending day for a lot of stocks because they were bouncing off of those lows and trending back upward along with the rest of the market. So here's KBH. It's strong churn today. Not really seeing a signal there that we can trade. TSCO, nothing there. It's more like resistance in that situation, but it could kind of go either way. TOL. Yeah, I'm not seeing anything that I could trade there. AMD. This one triggered above yesterday's semi-volume signal, and is putting in high churn today. It's not really that great of a look, honestly, but it could run. Serve, same kind of deal. It's triggered and it's putting in a lot of churn. It's kind of questionable, if it's good churn or bad churn, because it's not in the location you like to see it in. AXTA, this one is another one of these that is churning at VWAP. Oh, and actually, this is the one I looked at a minute ago. So this one, it had a signal today and yesterday and the day before. So this one is like, it's trying to decide if it wants to find support here at this prior level and at VWAP here. So this one just needs to kind of break above this volume churn area to get a good confirmation of a long. And NOC triggered 2 days ago, it looks like, but there wasn't really much of a setup here. It just broke above this resistance line and yesterday, and so that was good, and then it was just continuing today. I don't see any on the red side today. Let's see what we got on the weekly. So weekly signals. Let me zoom in here on the weekly so that's a little easier to see. So this one, it's kind of not really clear what's going on. There's a little bit of a pullback here, and we're getting a little bit of a volume signal, but it's kind of back up here toward the highs is where the trigger point would be, so it's not ideal. XPO, this looks a little better. Not that great, honestly. I would probably want to wait for a volume signal down here on the daily and for this to get a little bit farther off the highs over here in the next week or so. You can see on the monthly, we had a lot of volume kick in right here, down here at the VWAP, and then we triggered above that last month, coming back down to kind of test that breakout area this month. And so we need to see some volume pick back up in here as we come back down to test these levels and show us that there's still buyers in there. DISCA, so XPO, that's an interesting kind of setup. DISCA, so we had a weekly signal this week at VWAP. This is an interesting level because we're coming back down to test this prior level that held, and to see here if the bids are going to step up. And it looks like the bids are trying to step up, but we didn't really have the strongest close today. It was weaker than the overall market. The overall market triggered above yesterday's bar. This bar is definitely lower. I would give that one another couple of days. Etsy, I think I already looked at this one on the week, on the daily. Weekly doesn't look any better, really. Let's see here, XL and X. This one looks decent. We've got a deep pullback here, sharp decline, and we are at the year-to-date VWAP and putting in a couple of weeks of churn volume. But this one, it still needs more time, I think, because this one is this super wide range bar here is just a little bit not the kind of thing I look for. Sometimes these will immediately reverse and jump straight back up really powerfully, but I think it needs a little more time to clean itself up. Let's see here. So we had two weekly volume signals down here at this level. And so we've got kind of a wide range here of prices. We got churn up here, we got churn down here. So it's not really, I don't think it's ready to go yet. I think what we're probably going to see is if next week maybe we'll come back up retest this from above and then take off, hopefully. That would give a nice setup for continuation long, but let's see if that happens. It might just go or it might fall apart. You just never know. Either way, I don't think the setup is ideal yet. Lin. So, yeah, there's nothing there really for me. DCX or DGX. Nothing there for me. Had a nice monthly a few months ago. This one's too extended. Could be a base breakout above that churn bar, but this could just be resistance and we could fall from here. So nothing there for me. JCI, same deal. NCLH. Two really ugly candles in the last 2 days. Really not clean. And the weekly is just not really anything there. DVN. This is a little bit prettier. You got a little bit better risk to reward back up to the high of this pivot. And we got two churn bars that came in on the weekly. Some churn coming in on the daily here. A little bit kicked in right here on today's bar. So I kind of like that. It would be really nice if Monday gave us another inside bar on a brighter signal here, and then we triggered in. I don't know if that will happen, but anyway, so a trigger up above these, the highs of this range would probably be good back up into the high of that pivot, and that is DVN. Nothing really there. ADP. EA, I was kind of keeping an eye on this one. We got some daily volume signals down here. We were retesting it here, and it triggered down here, kind of falling down with the market today, and then reversed like everything else, and didn't quite make it above yesterday's high, right up here around this VWAP level. Yeah, I think I would probably wait for another volume signal to clean it up and give us a real strong bias. But there is, you know, if you wanted to accumulate some shares there, that's a decent area. This weekly on OMC, this one is one I kind of like. I saw this one earlier. So we got this quarterly pullback that happened here. We came down to the low of this range where some volume was in. This was the lows here, lows here, lows here, tested on volume, and it held. We came up, and so now you can see the volume kicked in here on the monthly, and that's where we drove up from. And so this is triggering above a monthly, or excuse me, a quarterly pullback. It's triggered above that this month so far, and it's trying to see if it's going to hold. And so we're basically retesting this breakout area as support. And so we come down here on the weekly, and we're putting in a volume churn bar on the weekly. So this, to me, looks pretty obviously strong. This is exactly where I would want to see the volume churn come in. As we're coming back down to retest this breakout level as support, we're seeing support come back in. At least this is how I am interpreting this volume churn down here. So this looks good to me. As far as risk to reward, it looks good. We got more than 2 R's back up to the highs, and it could go on farther from there. You can see there's, let's see, we got up into this area up here in 86, 87 area. So it looks like we got about 4 R's up into that area. So that can be good. So keep an eye on OMC. I'm going to watch that one myself and look for a possible trigger next week. So I kind of like the look of that one. I never know for sure. You're never going to know for sure. So sometimes you just have to do your analysis and then bite the bullet. That's pretty much what you do. This one, I'm going to look into the stock, see how liquid and all that it is, but because I've never traded that one as far as I know. But anyway, that's an interesting setup to me. RTN. So this one doesn't really look that good. Now, it's a weekly pullback here, putting in some churn volume down here at the VWAP level. But I don't really like the way this monthly is set up. So we've bounced off these lows. We're coming up here. This is essentially looking more like a pullback in a downtrend on the monthly that could come back down here and retest the low of this pivot. So I'm seeing resistance here. And so it could end up working. But I don't think the probabilities are high enough for me to want to trade that one. So the biggest one I think I see is that OMC. So I'm going to keep an eye on that one, and we'll see where that one goes. Today's intraday signals. Let me switch my charts here. OMC was actually one of them. So we had churn on the open on all time frames here, as you can see. This one I wasn't really trading this morning because of the market sell-off. Like I've said before, my ideal environment is in an uptrend because I'm a long trader currently intraday, and so I wasn't really looking for any trades this morning. But this one did put in some high churn volume, and could have been used for a breakout, opening range breakout. XPO, another high churn on the open, broke down under that first candle's range. You can see on the 30 and the 15 there, that was pretty nice. 10 worked pretty well as well. Toll. We had a high churn on the 5, not much on the 10. Several of the higher time frames had some churn on the open. Mostly, you can see that the volume kicked in down here at the lows, where we had this range develop, this kind of double bottom before the breakout. Then the pullback was found with these relative volume signals here, and so that one gave you 2 R's there, obviously, at least. So let's see. Disney. I'm just going to look at the highest churn because I didn't actually trade any today. Just going to look at what I missed. Yeah, not much going on there. Some opening range churn here. Some of these were pretty ugly where we just kind of triggered lower with the rest of the market and then did a reversal off the lows. And now this one's really pretty. This hourly doji kind of set up here with high churn on the very bottom. That was a nice little signal right there. And I'm sure there's probably several stocks that all exhibit the same kind of pattern on a day like today where there was the nice bounce in the whole market. Let's see on the greens. Yeah, so we had high churn on the open, churn at the very low. I really like, on the short side, I like these greens that come in and try to go north, try to go upward, and put in these churn bars, and it's telling you it's doing a lot of work but not getting much of anywhere. And so those kind I really like. That's a nice opening range break. There is another high churn on the open, hourly 30, 20, 15. This one was interesting because you could have taken it for a long and then a short up here at the highs if you were super aggressive. That's not something I would be doing, but I like these where we have this, indecision candle in the open, high churn, and then it cleans up over the subsequent candles so that you get a better risk to reward. And so you can see this one broke lower from there, and depending on where you placed your stop, you could have gotten many multiples of your risk, or at least 2 or 3. So I really like those with high opening range churn on indecision candle. Then we clean up in one direction or the other and give a better risk to reward ratio, and then trigger and hopefully get to your target. Those are going the wrong way here. I think those are some really powerful setups. Hourly had kind of this test lower on high churn. This kind of did a essentially the same setup, but on these higher time frames. So this one had an hourly that put in an indecision and then a lower entry candle where you could get a better risk to reward ratio. And so this one on the 2-hour chart would probably look like a nice signal. See if I can see that. Yeah, so you can see here on the 2-hour chart, that's what that looked like. The markets are fractal, so these types of signals all just play into higher time frame signals. The same patterns happen over and over again on every time frame. High churn on the 30, a little bit on the 20, high on the 15. I like this one where we had this, the two 15s that made up this 30 went together to create this nice risk reward setup here. So you got to almost 6 times your risk there. So that was a nice little setup for short traders. And last but not least, CBS. High churn on the open, indecision candle, bottomed out here, and this one gave a nice risk to reward that way. Like I said, intraday, this was just not the right environment for me. There were a lot of trades that I saw. The markets had some nice trades, and some of the more liquid stocks that I just keep an eye on had some nice signals on them. You can see here, CBS had these like little 5-minute bottoming out candles showing you where the lows of these ranges were. Those are always nice to see, but yeah, today was just not the environment for me, so I always like to wait for things to clean up and then give me a nice context for the type of trades that I do, where the whole market's feeling confident, that kind of thing, and I don't have to second guess my entries and so forth. So anyway, hopefully tomorrow we'll start triggering some of those daily setups and start getting long again. We'll see how that works. I did want to mention Crude. I think Crude has had a signal that's kind of been developing on the daily. You can see here we've got some signals that have been forming. Now, my kind of bias from the economists and so forth that I follow is that I kind of want to see Crude falling. But if I wasn't biased in that way, this would look like a pretty pullback to me. We've got, a volume level here, volume, this on a break above looks pretty good to me. But like I said, my bias is kind of short Crude, longer term, so I kind of hate to be aggressive with that. I kind of expect in some way for this to fail at some point. So, and I don't trade futures currently anyway, but I did want to mention this signal that's been developing here, and this is kind of in tandem with the overall markets as well, as I was talking about earlier, where we've been having these volume signals on these market pullbacks. So um, take that for what it is, and whatever your bias is, go ahead with that. But crude light and the markets are having these two volume signals that are happening. So that's what I've got. Had a nice trade on Bitcoin that worked really well. These signals that we've been talking about the last couple of days are trying to set up here. So this could be a pullback long back up into the highs of this pivot. It can also always trigger and then fail. It just kind of depends, or it could just range around here for a few more days before going. But this is kind of telling you that there's a level right in here that is of interest to the bigger players. So keep an eye on those, and I will talk to you later. Thanks.